Hello, welcome back to our latest We Are Sunderland briefing with, as ever, myself, Dom Short, and Scott Wilson, both from We Are Sunderland. And as promised, we're joined by a special guest, Stu Rayner from the Yorkshire Post, who's going to provide some Sheffield United insight ahead of Saturday's playoff final. Stu was at Chris Wilder's press conference on Tuesday. We're going to go and speak to Regis Labrise this afternoon on Thursday, so we'll get the latest and the build-up there, and we'll talk team news. We'll touch on team news today because a couple of little snippets have just come out over the last day or so. So we'll talk about that, but obviously we'll get definitive answers from Regis Labrise, who has a bit more insight than me and Scott as to into what's going on at Sunderland's.
Well, let me just say straight off the bat, Stu's got plenty of Sunderland insight as well. Stu, for those of you who don't know him, used to work at the Journal in the North East. I've sat on many a Sunderland press box with Stu, so don't let him pretend he doesn't know what's happening in Sunderland either.
So basically, Stu, what we're saying is if you fancy coming on here every week with us and chucking that about Sunderland, then you're more than welcome. But it's Sheffield. It's Sheffield we want to pick your brains about today. Obviously, you cover them week in, week out. First of all, what's the? We'll get into the team news and Wilder's press conference and stuff. But what's the general feel around the club, around Sheffield, just around the place ahead of Saturday's final?
I think it's quite positive, actually. I think Sheffield United have timed it a bit better than Sunderland in terms of when they dropped into the playoffs. I think falling out of the title race on Easter Monday in their case gave them 2 games, and I think it was about the right amount of time to just reset mentally, not too long like Sunderland to keep ticking over and try and keep players fit and sharp and all this sort of thing. And it obviously showed in the semi-final against Bristol City. I mean, things went in their favour. Obviously, the sending off in the first half of the first game, but they were really ruthless in exploiting it. And you know, to win both legs 3-0, biggest aggregate margin in a championship semi-final, it was kind of ideal preparation. You know, allowed them to use the bench and sort of, as I say, get the right amount of sharpness without sort of while retaining a bit of freshness. So I think generally it's quite positive. Obviously, it's always it's always a bit of a come down when you've been involved in a title race and you end up dropping into the playoffs. But I think the fact that the top 2 have been so good probably allows both of these teams to not beat themselves up too much about it. And yeah, I think there's a feeling of positivity and a feeling of realism, and obviously the fact that Sheffield United finished higher than Sunderland in the league. There's confidence to be derived from that. So I certainly don't think they're cocky about it. I don't think they're expecting to walk it by any stretch of the imagination. But I think there's reasons to be positive from their perspective. Yeah.
Both games have been tight between the sides. Obviously,
Yeah.
This season, Sheffield United edged the first game in November after Sunderland had Chris Mefford sent off, and then Sheffield had a player sent off as well, didn't they? Later in the game, then Sunderland won at the Stadium Light in January. But I was reading Wilder's quotes this week about how his squad depth now was transformed in January, and the bench then was packed full of under-21s players. Is this the best Sheffield United Sunderland will have faced?
Yes, I would say so, because to sort of jump ahead in terms of the team news, they've got everybody fit, with the exception of Ollie Arblaster. And as you say, they added a lot of depth in January. I mean, the big signing for them, their sort of equivalent of Enzo Lefebvre, was Tom Cannon, who's not really, come off in terms of goals and what they signed him for. But nevertheless, the numbers are much better in the squad, and they now look like they've got a lot of options from the bench. So I think if it boils down to who's got the better bench, I think Sheffield United will be quite happy with that, because there's a lot of depth there now.
Well, that leads us on. Sorry, I was just going to say, Scott, that leads us on to Sunderland and Romain Mundle and a bit of concerning talk.
Yeah, I was just going to ask why we're just on with Stu and Sheffield United and the feel around the place. I mean, what about the whole Wembley thing? Because Sunderland fans went through a long old period where it just felt like every time they trekked down to Wembley, they kind of knew what was coming before it came. And then sure enough, it came. Now, Sunderland have at least put that to bed to a degree with obviously the League One playoff success. There's been a lot swirling around Sheffield United this week. Now, I fully understand why Chris Wilder comes out and says, I couldn't care less. Yeah. And I kind of fully understand why it probably doesn't actually mean much to the players, because ultimately they have not been involved in those games. It's past history to them. For a fan base, for a fan, I think it is there in your mind, isn't it? I mean, that's got to be in the mind of all the Sheffield United fans heading down. Is it going to be here we go again?
Yeah, and it's not just Wembley, Scott. I mean, it's 100 years since they won at Wembley. Their first game at Wembley, they won. They've never won since. But it's the playoffs in general. You know, they've lost a few at Cardiff as well. They've had 9 playoffs now, one a relegation promotion one under the old format we had in the 80s, and 8 in this format, and they've not got through any of them. So there's a lot there.
Yeah.
But, I mean, Wilder's been banging this drum for weeks and weeks. He's obviously been using. I can't remember who won the League Cup final, but he was mentioning that as a motivation.
Some team from somewhere in the northeast. Yeah.
So that's been reeled out, and of course this week he's got Crystal Palace to add to the list.
Yeah.
So if ever there was a year to sort of sell the message to people that the history doesn't matter, this is the year. But of course, doubts are going to creep in, and as you say, it's probably more a factor for the fans than it was for than it will be for the players. If it gets tight and it gets nervy, there will be that nervousness. But I suppose it will be more of a factor if it were a two-legged game, if it were at Bramall Lane sort of thing. Yeah. And they got through that without any alarm. So that's maybe put a few minds at rest. But yeah, you can't, as you say, it doesn't affect things. It shouldn't affect things, but we kind of know it does in terms of the sort of whole feel around the place. So we'll wait and see if it sort of gets to those squeaky bum moments, how people react. But as I say, it's a good year to be plugging that line about the teams have done it, so we can too.
Yeah.
And Wilder was quite honest, very honest, wasn't he, about Sunderland, saying he doesn't really know what to expect because he's seen a few different types of Sunderland this season. But what's the Sheffield United perception of Sunderland? What will Sheffield United fans heading down, Sheffield United in general, be expecting of Sunderland, do you think, on Saturday?
Well, I mean, you reeled off those league games there, and that immediately sort of stamps on any complacency. They certainly won't be taking them lightly. I think Sunderland have got a lot of strength in the wide areas, and Sunderland, Sheffield United have got sort of a slightly makeshift right back in Hamza Chowdhury, a left back who's a definite left back and a good left back, but an attacking one. So there could be a bit of vulnerability there for Sunderland to exploit. I think there'll be a lot of respect for what Sunderland can do. I don't think they'll be taking them lightly by any stretch of the imagination. But they are a bit of an unknown quantity. Obviously, all the Sheffield United fans will have watched the semi-finals, and they were 2 close games. But the way Sunderland ended the season, you're not quite sure just how undercooked or ready they are, and we'll find out at Wembley, I guess.
What about tactics-wise for Sheffield then? I mean, while the Briss has shaken things up quite a lot this season, Wilder tends to be more straight down the line with it, doesn't he, in terms of how he sets his side up? Not necessarily who plays, but the general kind of system they're slotting into. Yes,
until a few weeks ago.
Right.
He's been very much. He's kind of abandoned the old back three of the last spell at Sheffield United, and this season's been very much 4-2-3-1. But I think I'm right in saying in 4 of the last 5 games he's suddenly gone 4-4-2, and he's really used Kiefer Moore. He's really used Kiefer Moore as a target man. So it's easy to say, his goalkeeper will be Michael Cooper, his back 4 will be Chowdhury, Ahmed Hodzic, Robinson, Burrows, his midfield will be Peck and Souza. And beyond that, other than Gus Hamer playing, anything's possible really in terms of combinations, which is a good place to be. It's a good place for Sunderland to be as well in terms of,
It's very, very, very similar to Sunderland. In that on our last pod this week, we were basically saying the back 5 picks itself. Neil and Bellingham play. Lefebvre will play somewhere. But then everyone else around that in the front 4 is to a degree up in the air. Yeah. And it sounds similar then with Sheffield United.
Yeah, Hamer's kind of a similar player to Lefebvre as well. He will probably come from the left, but he could easily slot in at number 10. And as I say, they've gone 4-4-2, but in both legs of the semi-final, they brought Callum O'Hare off the bench, went to 4-2-3-1, and O'Hare scored. So he's making a strong case to play. Obviously, if they go 4-4-2 and they play Kiefer Moore up top, that will kind of dictate that they go a bit more direct, same as back in the day when Sunderland had Niall Quinn. It's an obvious way to play when you've got them. So yeah, they could go one of two ways, and they could change it during the game. So that element from both teams will be quite interesting as well.
There's something wonderfully throwback about the potential of a 4-4-2 versus 4-4-2 in the Championship playoff final, isn't there? Gone are the days where I thought I'd see that. Did you see that clip doing the rounds of Sean Dyche's commentary for Palace's goal?
No, I didn't.
No.
Oh, it's worth seeing. Basically, Sean Dyche must have been on 5 Live, I think, for Palace City. And like 30, 40 seconds before the Palace goal, he was asked, what do you want to do? What would you do in this situation? And he said, well, I know it's simplistic for me to say, but obviously City's high aggressive press, I'd get the ball to your big man up front and surround him with bodies and try and play obviously beyond City's press. And Dyche had just finished talking when
the tenor had his
yeah. But Dyche and the likes would enjoy a 4-4-2 versus 4-4-2.
Yes.
What would it mean for Sheffield going forward if they lost on Saturday?
Well, I think with all the clubs with parachute payments, there's a clock ticking, isn't there? You know, you want to get back first year because we've seen what it's like recently. That's your best chance. Second year, you've still got a good chance. Third year, it drops. Well, third year, Sheffield United won't have a parachute because they've only been up one season. So yeah, if they were to miss out this year, then next year is kind of not last chance, obviously, but last real advantage they've got. And I guess more than anything, when you've had a 92-point season, I mean, Wilder would call it a 94-point season because they had 2 deducted, but either way, when you put those hard yards in, you want something to show for the end of it. It would be quite demoralising to get that far and miss out. I don't think it would be the end. I don't think this. I think there's fewer players than in Sunderland's squad, for example, that might get picked off by the big boys if they were to miss out. But there would have to be a few go, I suppose, and it really does put the pressure on the next year.
He's done a good job there, Wilder, hasn't he? Because I think it's easy to forget about the 2-point deduction. I think it's easy to forget now just how bad Sheffield United were last season. Just kind of how much of a mess it felt like they were going to be in when they went down.
Yes.
I think our pre-season bid, I think we were saying Luton looked like a team who were ready to just hit the Championship and take off where they were. Sheffield United, God only knows what they might end up like. Well, that shows how good we are, doesn't it? But he's done a good job, hasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, what's happened to Luton this season just shows what could have happened to Sheffield United. Sort of it could easily have gone the way of Sunderland in 2017-18 when they dropped through. They were a mess, and I saw them in the final game of pre-season, and I think at that stage they'd only got a couple of signings through the door. Half the players in the last team of the season were under 21 players, making the numbers, the kind of players who are on the bench. In January when Don was talking about the squad being stretched. So yeah, to sort of get their heads right so quickly, I think more than the footballing side has been really impressive, and he's done a really good job. When I say there's probably fewer Sheffield United players will be picked off, he's been very good at picking really good Championship players.
Yeah.
People like Michael Cooper, people like Callum O'Hare, who you need to get out of that division, rather than Sunderland. You feel they've got a few younger players with maybe a higher ceiling, but they're not been there and done that, merchants, are they? So it's been really impressive just how quickly he's been able to flick the switch when you consider that he was the manager for the last 6 months of that relegation season and he couldn't get a tune out of them for love nor money. So the fact that he has been able to turn it around has been really, impressive on his part. And when you mentioned back about the mood around the place, I think that feeds into the realism. I think a lot of Sheffield United fans still remember what it is they've come from. And apart from anything else, the manager reminds them on a regular basis. He's not shy about pointing that out, and he's quite right to, because it's all been part of the journey.
You mentioned Tom Cannon earlier. What's been the story there? Because Sunderland were heavily linked last summer. They were heavily linked again in January, as a few clubs were in January. Obviously, he ended up at Sheffield United. How's it gone so far? And will he start on Saturday?
Badly, and therefore probably not. Badly in the terms of what it's like when a big striker comes in like Kelechi Iheanacho or whatever, you need that first goal. And he just hasn't got it. And when he goes, you can feel it when he goes through a one-on-one at Bramall Lane. There's not any expectation that he's going to score, probably on his part as well as the fans. He just needs to break that duck. But in the meantime, I mentioned Kiefer Moore. He's the big target man guy, and Tyrese Campbell has been doing very well at sort of leading the line as a lone centre forward when they've played with that. So that their form hasn't helped either to open the door for him. I mean, he has started a few games, so it wouldn't be the biggest shock in the world if he were to start. But you would think that Campbell and Moore, whether it be two of them or just Campbell on his own, would be better options. And maybe the fairy tale, I guess, would be for Cannon to come off the bench and score a winner or something. But yeah, it's been tough for him, just like it always is for an expensive striker when you're waiting so long for that first goal.
And I know you mentioned him before, but Hamer, the kind of X factor player from the outside, it feels like he's the one who's a game changer for them, and probably at a level. I mean, I think we were saying that we had the argument with Dom. It's probably a couple of Leeds midfielders who'll argue against it, and obviously Job and Chris Rigg would have a say, but he's got to be right up there for the best midfielder in the Championship.
Yeah, I mean, he's basically a number 10. I say he mainly plays on the left, but he's basically a number 10. But he's not prepared. He's not afraid to put his foot in as well.
Yeah.
So he's got that good mix that you need at Championship level. And yeah, he's the creative spot. He is the one of all the squad when they finished the season that I remember they played at Stoke in the first game. I say after they dropped out the automatic promotion space, he was the one they made him sit in the stands and watch the game because you're terrified about him getting injured as opposed to anyone else.
I'll just come to you, Scott, before we go back to Stu and kind of wrap up with predictions and how we think it's going to play out. The Mundle thing, then we touched on it on Tuesday, and it's since emerged that he had to miss a couple of days training. We'll get answers on Thursday afternoon, perhaps, depending on how much Labrice wants to give away.
Yeah.
But I guess it'd be, hopefully he's fit to feature, but it'd be a surprise. Now we know that if he starts, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the last vid in the week, we were talking about starting 11, and I think we were both saying that, Mundle does give them the better balance, but just how fit is he and how big a kind of risk is Labrice willing to take, given he's only started 5 league games all season, or 5 league games since about November. Anyway, yeah, it's feeling more and more now like Mundle won't start, doesn't it? He'd had the second hamstring layoff. He came back and was an unused sub in the first leg of the semi. He comes on in extra time in the second. Got through that okay, or seemingly it looked like he did, but subsequently come to light that there was a bit of a reaction from that. He wasn't able to slip straight back into training. I'm told we're led to understand that he is now training. Whether that's absolutely full training, I don't know. But, given that there are other options there, given that there are other things Labrice can do and has done there, it would feel like a really, really big risk, I think, now to throw him in there if that's the situation he's in. Hopefully he's available, because I still think even Mundle with a slight nag, a slight worry is a good option in the last 15 minutes, 10 minutes if you're chasing something, if you want to change the dynamic of how you're playing. So I think if he's in the squad at all, it will still benefit Sunderland, but it's feeling now like it's too big a risk to start. On the other side, it sounded more positive with Patrick Roberts. I mean, again, we should get a better guidance, hopefully, when Labrice does his press conference, but obviously he played the first 95 minutes until he was replaced by Mundle in the second leg of the semi, but had been carrying some kind of a calf, issue. By all accounts, was just starting to feel it towards the end of the game when he went off. So there is something underlying there, I think, and Sunderland will probably want to have a good look at it and get to the proper bottom of it in the summer. But the soundings are that just as he was able to get through 95 minutes of that game, so he'll be able to get through the bulk anyway of the final on Saturday.
Sorry, David. It's a tricky one with Mundle, because if he's got 20 minutes in his legs, do you bring him on after 70 minutes, or do you think, well, actually, there might be 50 minutes left?
Yeah.
It's difficult when you factor in extra time.
Yeah.
Who will Sheffield United see as the danger men? Ben, Stu?
As I say, I think generally the wide players they'll have to keep an eye on it. I mean, just the way the fixtures have been, I saw a lot of Isidore in the first half of the season. He's kind of tailed off a little bit in terms of his goal output since, but he's always dangerous. And there's quality all over that midfield in particular. So there's plenty of threats in both teams, I think.
Right, are we then to both? How do we see it playing out?
I'll jump in. I've said all along, I think it's going to be really tight. I think it'll be cagey, certainly initially. I think Lebris is pragmatic to his core. You know, however he sets his side up, it will partly at least be to contain Sheffield United, keep things tight, keep Sunderland banging it. I think Sunderland are going to win 1-0. And I think the goal will come late. So my ender 78, 1-0 Sunderland.
Stu, it's hard following Scott because the predictions are always so thorough. You now need to get the full works.
Oh, well, I think it might go beyond 90 minutes. Because I do agree with Scott. I think it'd be really tight, and I don't think Sheffield United will leave themselves wide open either. So it could be very cagey. I mean, I said in another prediction 2-1 to Sheffield United in extra time, but it's toss a coin really. I don't think there's much to choose between them. I think it'll be, like Sunderland's 2 semi-final games. I think it'll be decided on very tight margins.
I'll go 1-0 Sunderland as well. I'd worry for Sunderland, I think, if it went to extra time, just because of that squad depth we talked about with Sheffield United and
I'd worry for Sunderland if it went to penalties.
Well, yeah, we won't even get to that.
Well, that's another one. Sheffield United have lost their last 6 shootouts.
Really?
So they both, I say the history for both teams is
well, to be fair, really. Given Sunderland's record from penalties this season, let's go 0-0 on penalties.
I was just about to say, has there ever been a 0-0 shootout? Keep us stepping up. I can't see anything other than the tight, cagey game. No. We were saying in Tuesday's vid and pod, Stu, it feels like maybe Sheffield United are firm favourites for the bookies. The 14-point gap has been trotted out a fair bit, but it feels like that's maybe swayed slightly by the fact Sunderland completely tailed off, knocked 3 or 4 games on the head.
Yeah.
So some of them were a lot closer. Some of them were packed in with the 3 above rather than all of those below.
Yes.
For 41, 42 games of the season. It was only those last 4, 5, 6 games when they found themselves on their own, wasn't it? So there's clearly not much at all to split the sides.
Well, as I said, with the 2 sort of major cup finals, the underdogs won both of them. So I really don't think it counts for much. I think it's I agree with both of you. I think it's going to be really tight. And I say I'm kind of hoping with my Yorkshire Post hat on that some Sheffield United strength from the bench sort of holds sway, but I wouldn't put my house on anything, to be honest with you, other than it being really tight.
Yeah.
Bro, well, let's wrap up there. Thanks so much for joining us, Stu. Thanks for our partners, the Fans Museum and the Cospex Opticians. Thanks for you for watching. Do subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. And if you're listening on your podcast platforms, then rate and review. And keep your eyes on the site. Keep your eyes on We Are Sunderland, because we'll have full analysis from Lebris's press conference on Thursday afternoon. And then we'll have all the build-up to the game at Wembley. Keep your eye on our socials as well, because obviously we'll be down in London on Friday night, savouring the atmosphere. That'll be something special as well, won't it? So, yeah, keep your eyes peeled there. Enjoy the game if you're going. Safe travels. Enjoy it however you're watching it if you can't make it. And we'll be back next week, hopefully reflecting on a Sunderland win. Take care.